Hi, this video is on the multiple framings and/or conceptualizations of the word discourse. Discourse is a strange word. It's one of those other academic terms rarely used elsewhere. We don't talk about, oh, what did you engage in discourse with your teacher today? No. But on top of the fact that it is a strange kind of word, it is used in different disciplinary contexts differently. So in this video, I'm going to highlight three primary different conceptualizations of discourse as used by James G., Norman Fairclough, and Michel Foucault. So, before we get into those three theories, discourse is generally defined as any instance of verbal or written communication. In the images, we can think of communication within different contexts and how we alter our language use accordingly. An important shift in linguistics, though, is the move from language as a noun to as a thing to languaging, where it's a verb. And as a verb, languaging refers to the process of making meaning and shaping knowledge and experience through language. Swain, 2006, page 98. The verb languaging forces us to understand language as a process, rather than it is an object, not a thing. So when we language differently in different contexts, we begin to think about discourse. So discourse as, so we've got a kind of brief overview of the key conceptualizations and constructions of discourse by G. Fairclough and Foucault. First off, though, then, discourse is really an identity element, a way to construct identity. And I will go into these quotes and ideas in more detail in each of the next slides. But particularly then, Fairclough discourses language and power, and whereas Michel Foucault, where discourse is elements of knowledge power integrated together. So James G. understands discourse what he describes as capital D, in which socially based group conventions allow people to enact specific identities and activities. So, that part is really important, is that discourse and with little d and big D discourse are central to the ways of being different parts of ourselves, in which we take up different identities in varied contexts. For instance, three most significant identities for myself include being Dr. Wickens, Mom, and runner Corinne. Note how I've taken up a label or an identification for each of these different identities. How I talk, what I talk about, my interactions, how I dress. Everything is different. Because I'm not going to look like a runner in class. I am not going to engage myself as Dr. Wickens when I'm running either. They're just, it's like there's just two different mindsets. So in that, G differentiates between lowercase d discourse and uppercase D discourse. Lowercase d discourse refers to our regular definition for discourse, instances of oral and written communication. Upper D discourse, though, for G refers to ways of behaving, interacting, valuing, thinking, believing, speaking by specific groups of people. It's how we can identify people. So I want you to think about teachers for a minute. My spouse Carol always has joked and have complained about the amount of abbreviations and acronyms that serve as common lingo for educators. RTI, BRI, NCLB, goes on and on. I imagine that as educators, we could probably create an entire conversation using primarily abbreviations. This language helps define what it means to be a teacher. But also think about differences between teachers by grade bands or by discipline. Think about your quintessential elementary, middle, or high school teacher. I can usually tell teachers by grade bands and or by disciplines without even having to say a word. The same is true for specializations grades 6 through 12. Have you tried having a conversation between an English teacher and a math teacher? Jeez. They talk differently, they think differently, act differently, the way they stand, hold themselves. You don't have to get them to talk to know that one person is a math person. They got, that math head. And the other person is an English person, where they're going to look more holistically and broadly. They engage in different kinds of discourse, language use, and discourse, big D, ways of being and acting. Beyond little d discourse and big D discourse, G also refers to different kinds of discourses we use in our daily lives, specifically differentiate between primary discourse or life role discourse and secondary discourses. Our primary or life role discourse refers to the ways of being at home, what we learned first. Secondary discourses refers to ways of participating that came later, participating in church, school, and other large institutions. When primary and secondary discourses align, all is hunky-dory. Great, so to speak. When they do not align, however, that's when we need to create bridges between the primary and secondary discourses for our students to be successful. So then we come to Norman Fairclough and discourse. And Norman Fairclough has been quoted, says in one of his books, language is an irreducible part of social life, dialectically interconnected with other elements of social life, so that social analysis and research always has to take account of language. Because for Fairclough, language is integral and crucial to social life, language, power, and ideology are also highly interwoven. Indeed, Fairclough recognizes that texts, whether written texts or oral texts that later on may become written down, recognizes texts as elements of social events. And as such, they can elicit change in our thinking, our belief systems, our understanding, and in our worlds at large. Whereas G understands discourses as social situations and forces that enable different constructions of identity, for Fairclough, discourse is more situated in grammatical and rhetorical devices that can and should be analyzed for implicit messaging. As a Marxist and critical of neoliberal capitalism, Fairclough promotes critical discursive analysis, analyses of specific instances of oral or written communication as they connect to broader ongoing social discourses, particularly related to power. And within that, Fairclough underscores three underlying elements of discourse, written here. Discursive event, which is any instance of discourse, oral or written. And then the practice, the processes and manner on which the text happens, the discourse happens. So how is it produced? How is it interpreted? In what words and devices, what happens? What measures and power and pressures come into play to make that happen? And then social practice, which involves the institutional and organizational circumstances around the discursive event. So then we have the event itself. So if we would look at nestedness, we have the event itself, then that is shaped within a certain set of practices and understandings. If it's a written text, thinking about genre and what's expected in a particular kind of genre. How is it supposed to be written? NPR has a genre. And so in all of their little episodes, they have a particular formula that they follow. Most of our TV shows, procedural dramas, they have a particular formula they follow. That's the discursive practice. And then within those, there's the social practice that engages in the expectations, that shapes the nature of the practice and the effects of that practice. So we have the event with discursive practice and social practice, much broader. And it is social practices that are informed by networks of power and ideological structures that leads to our third theorist, which is Michel Foucault. So Michel Foucault was a French historian, philosopher, and theorist. He is best known for his historical analyses of prisons, sexuality, and knowledge itself in 18th, 19th centuries. In examining the formation of knowledge, objects, and statements, discourse, organization of knowledge through knowledge, objects, and statements, Foucault investigated the nexus of power structures that privileged particular ideas and continue to privilege particular ways and particular ideas, ways of being and thinking. So if we go back to James and go to G and his ways of being, some of them are more privileged based on the Foucauldian discourse. So while G articulates big D discourse, in many ways Foucauldian discourse is really big D discourse, because Discourse for Foucault is a way of understanding how truth and knowledge has come to be structured in the first place, such that power and knowledge are not separate entities. Power and knowledge are so inseparable that Foucault ended up collapsing them into one word, power knowledge, with a slash in between. Discourses then serve to demonstrate the boundaries between and among disciplines and bodies of knowledge. But discourses are constructed by people, institutions, and other authorities. Indeed, various cultural and society truths have come to be considered truths because they end up being stripped, though, of the historicity, Foucauldian word, element of history. And then through various disciplining forces and powers, certain ideas come to be argued and reified as truth. For example, how did Edison electricity come to win out over Tesla electricity? Consider how nativist ideologies may have undid undermine Tesla, a Serbian American who was born in Croatia. Or how did scientific industry come to back Western medicine and pharmacology over Eastern modes of medical treatment, including acupuncture? We have particular ways of thinking and being in Western culture, but particular ideas and people have backed particular ideas so that others then were excluded. Thus, through these networks of powers, these regulatory processes, culture, and language then preclude other ideas from even being thought. So then lastly, the final slide deals with some references and resources, some different resources, all other videos related to James G. Norman Fairclough and Michel Foucault, and additional references. And the transcript to this PowerPoint also has 2 others. Thanks.